Chapter 1, Sold to a Mafia Boss Son, Catalina POV, you're a king bastard Rodri, you know that right? A man, donned with Cuban links around his neck and a diamond wristwatch, released a chuckle as he twisted his head at Papa. The bald-headed man, presumably an alpha, laid back on a long red leather love seat with a glass of bourbon in his left hand, took a long swig and crushed the glass with the same hand. The shards cut into his palm and blood trickled down his arm. Then, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and pointed his finger at me. But, you know how to make a beautiful F*** king child. A wave of ice shot through my core, freezing me in place. The beads of sweat that formed on my forehead even seemed to turn to tiny ice cubes. It was blistering in this underground hideout, the air suffocating between the smell of cigarettes and sweaty vigilantes. However, goosebumps laced my arms. The room was littered with bricks of cocaine, spare ammo spewed about, a few leather couches, a metal stripper pole presumably for this alpha's dirty pleasure, and a bar stocked with every liquor one could ever need. The alpha wrinkled his nose and nodded his head as if it was on a constant bobble. He took a blow of his line of cocaine. When the powder flooded his nose, he pounded the wooden coffee table with his bloody hand. F***ck, son, you're a lucky man. The man looked over to the stocky, muscular, top-heavy man standing next to him. I grabbed at my sides in discomfort, my fingers making contact with the jean shorts I was wearing. It reminded me that I wasn't prepared for the occasion. I should have been on a daddy-daughter lunch date at this time, but instead I was with Papa meeting with men in his mafia ring. If I'd known any better, I would have covered my body. I loathe these slimy sholes scanning me up and down. You know, I pull women like this all the time. Dad, the young man, outfitted in an open, short-sleeved dress shirt and black jeans, drew back at his father. The man's father slowly rose from the love seat and nearly fell over in his drunken stupor. He clung to the concrete wall to maintain his balance and worked his way to his son. Oi, Efrain, Iris desagradecido, cabron, you must have learned that from that C***T of a mother of yours. Ungrateful F***ck, the younger man, apparently named Efrain, took a step towards his father who was walking slowly. Efrain wasn't the tallest, but he sure was heavily built in his upper body, and he clearly wanted people to know that via his open shirt. I followed his muscular shoulders all the way down to his rigid hands, which he had clamped into fists. At least she acted like a mother, unlike you, who never knew how to be a father. Efrain spat at his father, who now was a few steps away from his son. I glanced over at Papa, whose face was expressionless, but his whole body was shaking. He had told me we were going out to lunch but had to stop to take care of some business first. He still hadn't looked at me since we came down here. I wanted to grab him and run out of there, but I knew any sudden movements would land us in more trouble. There were two burly men watching the door armed with semi-automatics. The older man hobbled right up to his son and braced his fall using his son's shoulder. Efrain's eyes narrowed, and he looked sickened by his father's touch. He shook his father right off of him. To think I offer you such a sexy young woman, and this is how you repay me, you should be bowing down to me. Then the man reached out violently and grabbed his son's tank top. You will take her, he commanded fervently. A loud gasp escaped my mouth, and I quickly used my hands to cover it, but my reaction was too late. I drew attention to myself, the worst possible thing I could have done. To show my fear, Efrain's father's dark eyes darted right over to me, his pupils dilated, robust with lust. He released his hold on his son and started trudging towards me. All I could think of was why my dad wasn't saying anything. Why wasn't he protecting me like he always had? The grisly, drugged-up man inched closer and brushed right past my dad's arm. Papa did nothing to stop this fiend. I swallowed deeply and tried to keep from shaking uncontrollably, but it was too late. I couldn't hide the terror building in me. The man reached my side and put his arm around my waist. I flinched at his touch, and he only tightened his grip. His hands had needle pricks, and dead skin lined the fingertips. They were coarse, scaly, like a snake's sloughing skin. He moaned lasciviously, "Son, I'm offering you a proper woman, for once, if only you could tell the difference between a whore and a fine lady." Next, he raised his hand slightly to meet the end of my waist length, curly, black hair, and twisted the lock around his finger. He leaned in to sniff it. "Oh, how beautiful you smell, darling, sweet like a pineapple." Then he trailed his nose up the back of my blouse and slowly walked around me until he worked his way to my collarbone, where he touched his lips to my delicate skin. I could hear Papa's heartbeat pounding, but he didn't look back at me. His eyes were focused straight forward, and his nails were digging into his sides. The man stuck his tongue out and began licking my collarbone up to my neck. I was disgusted and couldn't hold back a dry heave as I felt his slimy mouth on me. I pushed away from him, but he quickly pulled me back. I did my best to resist. "Ah, a fighter, even better," he exclaimed, laughing devilishly. His hands were like anvils as he threw me against the concrete wall, pinning me against the cold surface. His black, cavernous eyes glared directly into mine, and a sadistic grin was plastered across his face. I felt his finger work its way up my exposed thigh right between my groin and my leg. I knew where he was going. I spat the little saliva I had right in his face, but instead of backing off, he brought his finger to touch it and put it right in his mouth. Delectable, his body was pressed firmly to mine now, and he tightened his other hand on my arm like a clamp. I wriggled and tried kicking his groin, but surely, the drugs had him feeling invincible. He rotated his head towards his son and growled, "Last chance, son, before I'm the one to take her virginity." Efrain sauntered forward and pulled his father off of me. "Ay, Dios, Papa. Eres loco. God, Dad. You're crazy." "Fine, I'll take her." He was so forceful in his pull that his father was thrown to the ground. His dad, who was in khaki pants and an unbuttoned Hawaiian dress shirt, sat on the ground laughing until he started gagging dry coughs like he was choking. I saw Efrain's eyes, and although they seemed far from chivalrous, it did seem like he didn't want his pathetic father to have me for himself. He muttered under his breath, "Don't think I'm doing this for your sake. I'll have my fun with you later," he sneered. Like father, like son, the two men at the door quickly approached, and he waved them off after he regained his breath. "So it sounds like we have a deal then, Rodri." The man gathered himself from the floor and approached my papa, who was still in the same position. "Any last words you would like to say to your precious daughter who you so graciously sold to us?" "Sold?" "Papa, he knew about this the whole time? He led me into this trap?" Papa didn't make a move to look at me. He shook his head ever so slowly. "A true coward, I see," the man muttered and then ordered, "Gentlemen, show him the way out." All I wanted was to see Papa's eyes, look him in the face and see, did he really do this? Why did he do this? How could he do this? After Mama died, he promised he'd always take care of me. The fact he wouldn't even speak to me, I felt the ultimate form of betrayal by the person I trusted the most. Papa purposely turned away from me so as to not meet my eyes. His face was pointed down, and I noticed a tear cascading down his cheek. I didn't know how to feel at this moment. I was terrified, confused, and betrayed. As soon as I heard the door close behind me, I truly felt alone, but now I realized maybe I had been alone even with Papa there. "I don't believe I got your name yet." The vile man extended his hand towards me, expecting me to shake it. I didn't move. Then, he took his free hand and clasped it with the other. "Yes, nice to meet you too, Augustine." So, this beast's name was Augustine. Not that I planned staying here for long. As soon as I could find a way out, I would. I didn't know where I'd go, but anywhere would be better than with these filthy scum. Skipping the pleasantries doesn't bother me. Augustine, slightly sobered up, walked over to the bar counter and grabbed some chewing tobacco and plopped a wad in his mouth. As he smacked his carcinogen, he stepped back towards me and Efrain, who was standing next to me. "I don't care what the H*LL ends up happening to you, my precious, but I expect you to provide me a grandchild with my son. I'd have *CKU myself, but my puta ex-wife had me castrated, fucking ex-wife." Apparently, I was too much of a sex maniac, but I loved her, and I did it. The worst decision of my life. With the wad of tobacco forming a bulge in his mouth, he spat a chunk out violently. "She still tortures me even from her grave," he continued. "After that, I don't care what the H*LL happens." There was no way I was going to have sex with Efrain if that's what he was implying. He looked like an absolute shole, playboy with short man syndrome, buzz cut, well-manicured chin-strap beard, and 2 diamond earrings. Efrain huffed and didn't seem pleased about this ultimatum either. It seemed like Augustine knew his son's disobedient ways and ordered, "And don't get any funny ideas, son. You don't deliver my grandchild, and you will be cut off from the pack and the family fortune." His son wasn't fazed, and I noticed his eyes looked dead set at his father, his face stiff. "Don't worry, father. She's only a minor inconvenience I can F***ck today and throw away tomorrow. Augustin seemed to soften at his son's words, and he patted Efrain on the shoulder. Very well, Mijo. I know we don't see eye to eye all the time, but I know you have the pack's best interests at heart. A grunt released from Efrain's mouth, and his father told us to leave and get down to business. I knew exactly what business meant, and I knew Efrain wouldn't waste any time to get this arrangement over with so he could go back to F***king every slut in Miami as it seemed he liked to do. Efrain grabbed my wrist to lead me out, and his touch sent a shockwave of ecstasy through my veins leading directly to my heart. My eyes rolled back at his long, rigid fingers making contact with my skin. I wasn't aroused or excited, but I also wasn't afraid. My chest tightened, and I felt something rising in me. I thought perhaps it was bile coming to my throat, but instead of food, it was something else. Something I'd never felt before and only heard about from my peers. Something I waited my whole 19 years for. My wolf cried out in me. From my soul, mate, ### chapter 2. Welcome to the pound. Efrain had handed me off in the hallway to Celeste, an omega in the pack. I didn't even have the time to reflect on what I just learned. That man, Efrain, was my mate? Surely not. It was a mistake. Maybe my heart was just confused, overwhelmed. I shook my head of my thoughts, trying to cast aside any of the horrific realities that would arise if Efrain was indeed my mate. The whole thought was impossible to begin with. The moon goddess wouldn't be so cruel to me, and my wolf may have been led astray in her thoughts due to the distressing situation. After a few minutes of conversation and introductions on my way out of the underground bunker through a maze of disorienting narrow alleyways, I realized Celeste didn't seem to belong with these men. She was far too kind compared to the other beasts I'd encountered so far, specifically Augustin and his son. "Where are you taking me?" I asked the young woman. She looked to be around the same age as myself, yet not as mature in features, with her bobbed hair and flamboyant makeup. She was wearing professional working attire, a pantsuit, which seemed out of place. "I was instructed to take you to what they call the pound," Celeste relayed ominously. My eyes must have shot open as she quickly noticed my reluctance. My feet stopped in their place, and she added, "It's not quite as bad as it sounds." She tugged at my arm to keep walking. "They're watching us, so don't stop. They'll think you're going to make a run for it." I rotated my head a bit too noticeably, trying to find the hidden cameras, and she released a small laugh. "Not like that, dear." She pulled up my arm and leaned closer, bringing her voice to a soft whisper. "The alpha's son, he's behind us." "Oh." I began craning my neck to see if Efrain was really there, and my action was met with a slap by Celeste. "You have a lot of learning to do if you want to survive here." Catalina, was it? Had she already forgotten my name? I just told her. I nodded, yes, affirming Catalina was, indeed, my name. "Beg my pardon, Katrina," she started. "It's Catalina," I vocalized, but she kept on talking. "But we get a lot of new ladies coming to the pound all the time. It's hard to keep track sometimes." What Celeste was telling me was the exact reason why I was feeling so unsettled through the grimy, graffitied alleyways. I hoped the female visitors were just for Efrain's personal fun and nothing more dastardly. Speaking of the pound, we've arrived. In front of me was a building that defied my every expectation of what I thought. I was being led into a tiny bodega nestled between a shoemaker's workshop and a cell phone repair store. If 3 people, including the cashier, could even stand in here without suffocating from a lack of oxygen, I'd be amazed. "Well, this is home," Celeste declared, and I didn't sense any sarcasm. She must have really felt that way. She gave a nod to the shop owner whose dark eyes bore into mine, tracking me as I took every step. His shaggy black hair looked like he had just bathed in an oil spill. He had a dragon tattoo winding down his deeply tanned forearm. "Afternoon, Fidel," the man, whose name was apparently Fidel, grimaced, not returning Celeste's greeting. Celeste tried to reassure me. "Don't worry, he's always wary of newcomers," but it didn't help. I could feel his gaze carving deeper and deeper through the side of my head. I had so many questions I wanted to ask. "So, where do we sleep?" was the first question to come out of my mouth. I was too overwhelmed from what my father had just done to me, what Augustin had just felt of me, and what Efrain had just said to me, that I needed time alone to think. How just an hour ago was I with my father, getting ready for a daddy-daughter luncheon, and now was I ready to be feasted on by some derelict mafia boss's son? Maybe it was the hopeful part of me that figured I was strong enough to get myself out of this situation, but the stench of something that resembled chlorine and sulfur entered my nose and left my stomach unsettled. Well, we share bedrooms, Celeste informed me. Of course, we did, along with 10 others. Even better, I guess there would be no alone time. And we just sleep on the shelves, I assume? This time I laced my question with sarcasm, but Celeste didn't seem to catch it. Celeste responded, I suppose you could, but I'd prefer my cardboard mattress, much better spinal support. Was she serious? She'd served Efrain and Augustine for nearly a decade of her life, and this was how they treated her? It made my skin crawl, wondering how I would be accommodated, given me being the newcomer. I'll just follow you, Celine, I said, purposefully calling her the wrong name as subtle payback for earlier, but she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did. Oh. That's who you look like. She exclaimed loudly. I jumped back at her, shrieking. I'd been trying to figure it out from the moment I saw you. Who? I asked reticently. Selena Quintanilla. My mother loved her music so much. The poor girl. Wasn't it tragic what happened to her? Celeste looked up to the sky, and she shook her head. I wish she would look down, since she was dragging me down a flight of stairs at the back of the store. What happened to? Before I could finish my question, Celeste lost her footing, and we both tumbled face first down the concrete stairs that led to an expansive underground network of hallways. Everywhere my eyes could see were charcoal-colored doors and red wine-colored wallpaper. It was unsettling. Celeste, are you okay? She didn't look injured, but she was momentarily unresponsive. I didn't know who in the world I'd search for help from because there was no way in H*LL I was asking that Fidel character. If she died here, surely it would have looked like I pushed her down the steps. Please, Celeste, you have to wake up. I begged as I shook her arms vigorously. She released a flighty giggle as her eyes jolted open. No worries, I'm completely fine. Efrain always said I had a hard head, which confused me because his head was always hard when I was around. Who the H*LL was this girl? At first, I thought she was just some innocent Omega, and now it seemed that wasn't the case. Maybe a product of her environment here, I supposed. Then Celeste gasped. Kalalali. You're bleeding. My name is not. I paused. Why even bother? I surveyed my arms and legs and didn't see any scratches or open wounds, but, as I was feeling my body, Celeste, who was splayed across the floor next to me, sat up and brought her finger to my forehead. She touched me, and then stuck her pointer finger in front of my face so I could see the red liquid. See? Blood, yes, I could see that. I'm fine, Celeste. I just want to get to our room, I insisted, even though she was a nice girl, and I would need a positive light in my life until I delivered on the deal my father had with Augustine, to give the wretched man a grandchild. Right now, she was driving me crazy. I had a lot to think about, prepare myself for. In my 19 years of living, I resisted having sex, but it wasn't because of a lack of suitors. It was due to my father's warnings that men were all slimeballs who just wanted a piece of my sweetest pie. I inherited a beautiful, curvy figure from my late mother, along with her skin that was nice and rich like a candied pecan, which she got from her years growing up in Malaysia. I didn't get much from my father as looks were concerned, which was fine with me because he was prematurely balding and had quite a wide nose, but I liked to think I learned a lot of his street smarts. But now, it felt like everything he taught me was a lie. He once told me, familia primera, which meant to always protect your loved ones, which made me furious as to how he could have dumped me off in this hellhole. Celeste helped me to my feet, and I brushed off my jean shorts. I noticed blood had already dripped onto my shorts. As if she read my mind, Celeste assured me, don't worry, dear, we'll get you some new clothes. I was worried what type of clothes Efrain and Augustine had women wear down here, but I was pleased that Celeste called me dear instead of another wrong name. We continued walking down the dimly lit hallways, room numbers on shiny gold plates decorating the door frames as if we were in a fine hotel. I shifted my gaze towards Celeste and what she was wearing, a navy blue pantsuit, and her outfit immediately made sense to me. She looked like a front desk receptionist. So, Celeste, are we staying in a hotel? I pried curiously. She hesitated a few strides before responding. Well, you could call it that if it makes you feel any better. What did that mean? Is that why you're dressed like a front desk associate at the Marriott? I hoped she wasn't offended by my subtle teasing. Oh, this thing, she exclaimed, looking down at her indigo-colored suit. This is just a costume. A word of advice: when you get freaky in the sheets with Efrain, men love playing dress-up. I nearly gagged at her statement. Now it made me wonder what my change of clothes would really be. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a sexy maid's uniform and not simply jeans and a t-shirt. After walking in an unsettled daze for a few minutes down hallways and up flights of stairs, we arrived at room 601. Celeste knocked on the black door in a rhythmic pattern that was surely some sort of secret code, and a minuscule slit in the door opened to reveal someone's lips. Square root of 69. A husky voice asked. 5 less than a baker's dozen, Celeste stated firmly. Immediately, the slit closed shut and the door opened. What a weird passcode, I thought. Celeste grabbed my wrist and led me into the room. We call it the lair, she stated ominously. ## chapter 3, kill on sight. A chandelier made of solid gold hung in the middle of the large square room, emitting dim rays of light. Velvet carpets lined the floor, and dark wood paneling outfitted the walls. A dozen sections of the room were walled off with sheer curtains. I could briefly see outlines behind one of the curtains of a person on their knees and the other standing up straight. Scattered moans bounced off the walls. This is where you'll be staying, dear. Celeste turned to face me, her amber eyes flashing a bright red as if she was aroused by something, maybe the moans. That odor of chlorine and sulfur that I smelt on the way down was just semen. No way an H*LL, Celeste. This is a prostitution ring, not a pack house, I stated firmly. I rotated my head around to see if there were any exits other than the one we came in, but there weren't. You'll get used to it soon enough. The moans actually helped me fall asleep. Her eyelashes fluttered as she confessed it. Instead of a wave of fear overcoming my body, it was replaced by pure anger. It felt like molten lava was coursing through my bloodstream instead of the sanguine liquid. Did my father know about this when he sold me to them? If he was in financial trouble, he should have let me know. I would have done anything for my father, yet this was how he treated me? Celeste was seemingly aloof to my fury and continued my tour, pointing me to my private oasis as she called it. There lay a pillow, a cardboard mattress, and a red leather love seat, presumably for lovemaking. Clearly, sleeping wasn't a priority in this pack. The translucent curtain didn't give much privacy, so I laid down on the couch and tried to lay as flat as I could to try and go unnoticed. By that time, Celeste had already left me, citing she had a busy day ahead of her, and I thought I knew what that meant. I saw the change of clothes she was referring to from earlier, and to my pleasure, it was simply a pair of navy gym shorts, albeit rather skimpy, and a white tank top. I'd put them on later. My mind began to swarm with thoughts about Efrain, the mate bond, my father's betrayal, amidst the moans and groans in the lair. I was overwhelmed with all of it, and my mind felt like it was going numb and my body felt extremely tired. But I needed to sort through what had happened. Did I have a mate? At first I assumed I did. I even heard my wolf yell, mate, but I didn't feel any pull to him after that. Even now, I didn't feel like Efrain and I were connected or destined to be together. Or maybe I was just denying what the moon goddess had in mind because I was so repulsed by him. Surely, he didn't seem like the pervert his father was, but he also was no gentleman. He had said it himself. He's a self-proclaimed playboy and didn't know how to take care of a woman. That's not the type of guy I could ever spend the entirety of my life with. As slimy of a man as he was from our first encounter, I didn't get a chance to have a real conversation with him. He didn't seem to want me either, so it was possible we could work around his father's request and get what we both wanted, our freedom back. The thought of that brought slight peace to my mind, only to be replaced by the thought of my father thrusting me into this situation. It made my heart feel like it was tearing at its seams. When I got out of here, I needed to get back to my papa so he would be forced to look his only child in the eyes and tell me why. I was a forgiving person, and I hated to hold any hostility towards my papa who, until this point, had been the perfect role model for me. I knew he had his hands entangled with the mafia. but he always promised me I'd never be involved. He specifically kept me shielded from that darker side of his life. And I always believed him. Maybe it was my trustworthiness that got me in trouble, but was I wrong for wanting to believe in the man who raised me to the strong woman I am today? My eyelids had the tendency to shut themselves while I was laying here, and I had to force myself to keep them open. But, after resisting sleep for longer than my body wanted, it appeared Celeste's words maybe had some sort of validity. Maybe the distant moans around me could be the cure to my insomnia. I must have dozed off momentarily because when my eyes jolted open, I noticed the whole room was dark, the chandelier's lights out, and the time on my watch read, midnight. I had been out for that long? I quickly gathered myself off the couch but immediately collapsed upon standing. Did I stand too quickly? My mind was ringing, and I felt nauseous. Was there at least a resident nurse at this pack house? I did my best to balance myself and made my way to the only entrance, grabbing onto different sheer curtains along the way. Luckily none of them fell down from my tight hold. In the background, I heard shrieks and moans echoing off the walls, and it made my headache even worse. They were distorted, louder than earlier, and I heard the grunts of men this time. It seemed like the late-night crowd was even more aggressive. Fortunately, I had no one stumble upon me as I was resting. It made me think that maybe I was off limits, for Efrain only, and all the customers were made clear of which girls were available. After many misplaced steps into sticky liquids and stumbling over a few adult toys, I made it to the guard at the door. It was hard to see his outline in the dark. "Excuse me, sir, I need to see a nurse, my head is." It was a literal shot in the dark to assume there was a nurse here. However, I figured with so many women in the harem that many would suffer sexually transmitted diseases that could prevent them from bringing in money. "Nobody leaves unless I get word from my alpha," he interrupted, his voice gravelly and low. "Just my luck. Or, unless it's an emergency," he added. "Oh, well, that gave me something to work with. It's an emergency, sir. I hit my head earlier and it may be bleeding internally." I pleaded this would work on the guard who seemed a bit dense just by the cadence of his voice. He grumbled, "Fine, go see the nurse, she's just down at the end of the hall. I'll call and let her know you're coming. And don't get any funny ideas. If I don't hear from her that you arrived in 2 minutes, I'm sending my men after you," he threatened. "Thank you so much, kind sir. I really appreciate it," I expressed. "The name's Alicia. I'm not a sir, you twat." "Oh, sh*t. You have to understand, my eyes are failing me, Alicia," and mixed with the darkness, it's like swimming through a pool of salt water. She growled and unlocked the door. I quickly scurried out, afraid to look back. I made my way down the hallway where the only light left in the building seemed to be. As I headed there, I overheard a familiar voice. It was Efrain's. He was with another person, one who I recalled right away from his shaggy hair and dark eyes. Yo, Fidel, I ain't getting bogged down by 1B*TCH, you hear me? What are you implying?" I heard Fidel ask, curiously. "'Cause I think I like where you're headed. Why do you think my father wants a grandchild, Fidel?" Efrain posed the question before answering it himself. "Because he wants me out of the picture. He knows I can't stand his A***s, and he always tells me how I'm a threat to his whole empire. There's no way I'm giving him an heir when he has one in me." "I see your point, man, okay." Fidel nodded his head, doing more listening than contributing ideas. "So what do you suggest we do about that?" "Easy. We kill the B***TCH, and bam, all H***LL breaks loose between our pack and the Valle del Sol pack. Then, when the moment presents itself, all our higher-ups will vote my father out as alpha for making this deal with Rodri in the first place. I'll get everything, and of course, my friend, I'll share the pot with you." Efrain's words felt like a spear penetrating my gut. I could hardly breathe. He had no intention to ever produce a child with me. I should have been wary of his intentions when he changed his tone so fast and conceded to his father. If I stayed here, I'd die. That much was clear. This was my only chance to run now that I was out of the lair. Surely, it was my best option, although, Celeste's words from earlier today served as a haunting reminder to me. "They're watching you." I knew my 2 minutes was nearly up and Alicia would have security on my A***s any moment now, and I had no time to consider the consequences. I tiptoed the other direction down the hallway, and as I turned the corner, I bumped into a shadowy outline, gasping loudly in astonishment. I quickly covered my mouth, but it was too late. Hey, Chicharito, I was just going to check on you. It was Celeste, and she was the only person here who would know a way out. But she seemed not to mind working for this pack, and it was difficult to know where her loyalty resided. I quietly pleaded with her, Celeste, you need to get me out of here. I just heard what Efrain planned to do with me. She stared blankly. I knew it was a bad idea to tell her anything. I should have made up a blatant lie. Okay, she said softly, really? Okay? I asked, dumbfounded by her willingness to put her life on the line for me. Yeah, why not? She threw back at me, seemingly perplexed herself. Well, I just assumed that you had a duty to Augustin and Efrain to uphold, I said, looking over her shoulder as I was anxious to get a move on as the seconds were catching up to me. Celeste opened her mouth and said something that made me realize she was anything but her naive looks. Trust me, dear, when I say this, there's no loyalty in the mafia. Her words hit heavy and made me think of my papa. There was no loyalty in family either, it seemed. Now, let's hurry up, she urged as she grabbed onto my hand and led me up a stairwell when a voice boomed over the speakerphone. Attention, attention, we have a runner, attention, attention, code 313, we have a runner, kill on sight, kill on sight. They were talking about me. Hashtag chapter 4, El Lobo's Cantina. Once you open this door, never look back. Celeste's face looked worried, and her tone was foreboding. I knew with the look in her eyes that if I was caught, there'd be no second chances. After running up a few flights of stairs, I was already bracing my arms on my knees, trying to regain my breath. That didn't bode well if I had to keep running to ensure my freedom. Not that I was out of shape either. Just, I didn't have time to actively work out. My papa always told me to focus on my studies, that my education would lead me to greater places he never could have reached himself. So, my life was mostly spent in libraries or cafes reading books or typing away on my laptop. Why are you helping me, Celeste? I asked, knowing she was risking so much for me. You remind me of someone who was special to me, someone that I lost to this type of life. I don't want to sit back this time and see the same thing happen, she confessed, her eyes blank as if they were lost in a memory. The air was silent between us for a split second until she snapped back to reality. Oh, I almost forgot. Take this. I was whipped back to reality when Celeste handed me a mysterious pouch, which was dangling from a chain. WH, what is it? I asked, not recognizing what its purpose served. Inside is a flask of morphine, enough to kill you. If you ever get caught, I'd recommend you take this. Trust me, it's the easy way out. She spoke solemnly, her eyes no longer the amber color as before, but rather a dark mahogany. I grabbed the pouch hesitantly, tossed it around my neck for now. Not having pockets, her words made sense. I just prayed it would never get to that point. Celeste, why don't you come with me? We can escape together. Maybe I still had too much hope left in me. Maybe I wasn't realistic, but I wanted her to have her life back, assuming she ever had one at all. She shook her head slowly. Listen, dear, I'm in too deep. The moment I step out that door, I go back to being a nobody, an undesired outcast. At least here, I'm always wanted by someone. I grabbed her hands as she spoke. Tears pooled around my eyes, and I felt them cascade down my cheeks. My father always told me, don't judge a man based on what he does. Judge him for who he is. At this moment, his words made sense to me. You may not see yourself this way, but Celeste, you're truly a light in this twisted underworld. You're different. You're not supposed to be here. I tried convincing her, hoping she would follow my lead. She giggled softly, her eyes holding back tears. And that's exactly why I have to stay, so I can be a light to these women here. Now, live your best life out there, Catalina. Promise? She remembered my name. Maybe she always had, but her airy persona was a defense mechanism to fight against the horrors here. I leaned in and wrapped my arms around her in an embrace. She felt cold, and all the warmth was coming from my body as I tried to heat her up like a soft blanket. Now, I saw what this life could do to a person firsthand, turn the brightest of people into a hollow shell of himself. I promise, Celeste, and I'll be back to tell you the story. I pulled back from her, and she smiled. A single tear dripped slowly down the bridge of her nose, and she quickly wiped it away. It seemed like she had been holding back her emotions for years. I quickly pocketed the small pouch of morphine Celeste had handed me, hoping I'd never have to use it. I put my hand on the long silver bar of the emergency exit door, and before opening it, I turned my head back to look at her one last time. "She's up there. Hurry!" I heard a commanding, masculine voice yell from down the staircase. Celeste stood there as the last line of defense while the group of men's footsteps thundered in the staircase. Her face was dark and defeated. She would be tortured by Efrain and Augustin once they found out she helped me escape. And she had no morphine left to end the pain on her own terms, with that guilt coursing through me. I turned back around and shut the door open, expecting to find freedom, but at what cost? It was pitch black outside, and rain was downpouring onto the pavement. For some reason, I had hoped I would find an expansive pasture of tall grass, one where I could run for miles with the wind pushing me towards my goal of freedom. However, I was met with a grimy alleyway and the stench of cigarettes and piss, faint rays of light coming from the moon and scattered street lights reflected on the puddles on the pavement, disorienting my sense of reality. My buzzing head pain felt like a migraine, and mixed with the rancid smells encircling me, it made me want to heave. I could hear distant shouting and banging from the door I just ran out of. The men were close, and I assumed that Celeste was doing her best to fight them off to give me a head start that would cost her life. I hoped in my naive way she would be forgiven for helping me, but I knew that wouldn't be the case. The anxiety of being chased caused my wolf to rise to the surface. I felt her urging me to shift, something I'd only done a few times since turning 18, since I really never had the necessity to, being focused on my academics and all. Luckily, my wolf's pelt was an ombre color, brown with a tinge of red, so that I wouldn't stick out as badly in the shadows. I let my instincts take over, my chest stretching tightly, my legs transforming to tendons, and the palms of my hands growing sharp claws and leather padding. The metal door swung open and bashed against the brick wall behind it. The sound shook me to my core, and I sprinted off, dodging garbage bags, broken bottles, and empty syringes of narcotics. Get that WH*3 before our alpha kills our A*Cs. A voice screamed out. I jumped onto a dumpster and saw a fire escape, which would have been impossible to climb in my wolf form. I couldn't risk shifting back because La Pandilla had also shifted and was hot on my heels. I decided to keep my high ground and leapt from the dumpster onto a parked car, and then onto a few metal barrels of goddess knows what, before landing on the pavement again. I turned the corner, not looking back, and found myself in another alleyway, this time faced with a row of tents and homeless, Miami's version of Skid Row. I was likely out of packed territory now. I lunged through a few men who were throwing poker chips around, causing the ceramic coins to go flying. F*CKU, you stupid F*CK. I heard as I blew by, and immediately, I ran into a few other squatters, one who was literally squatting, taking a SH*T on the pavement. I knocked him over by accident and may have sliced his leg with my claw in the process, which I felt sorry for. Another voice shouted, one of those magic F*CKs again, momentarily having my momentum stopped. I heard the wolves closing in on me, although there didn't seem to be as many as before. Had some found a different route to try and trap me? I had to be careful not to get blocked in. At this point, I couldn't feel anything. I could hear my heart thumping through my chest, but that was it. My eyes were purely focused on what was in front of me, and it felt like my escape was being televised to me rather than living it. I'd never imagined in my worst nightmare this type of life or death situation. However, the farther away I ran from the pound, the more my chest tightened. My airways seemed to shrink as well, but maybe that was from all the frantic running I was doing. Was it the fear that was drowning my lungs? Or was it something else? Mate, mate, mate. My wolf kept repeating these words to me. Don't leave your mate behind, my wolf ordered. My wolf was really trying to convince me that Efrain was my mate. Yeah, not going to happen. This fatigue, this disorientation, this tightness, it was all from the fear of being caught. That I was sure of. The pain in my chest radiated through my forelegs and hind legs like shrapnel. It felt like a dozen acupuncture needles piercing my nerves. It was so intense, I wanted to collapse, and paired with my blistering migraine, I couldn't focus. I began running into more people, more walls, more obstructions as I turned corner after corner into more enigmatic mazes of Miami's underworld and alleyways. I was surprised the wolves behind me hadn't caught up. Finally, I reached a main road. It looked like Ocean Drive, neon lights, lively bars, palm trees, and tourists. This was the part of town where the mafia wouldn't dare show their faces openly, with so many eyes on them. Efrain's pandilla must have stopped as I moved out of their territory in fear of getting caught themselves. Quickly, I shifted back to my human form, forgetting that I'd be naked after doing that. Well, for Miami, nudity wasn't that uncommon luckily, and although I loved my body and I found my raw femininity beautiful, I wasn't one to parade around in my birthday suit. Luckily, the pouch of morphine around my neck stayed with me. I located a street vendor selling cheap swimsuits, counterfeit luxury bags, and flip-flops. They were asking exorbitant prices, trying to exploit desperate tourists. Their business practices didn't concern me, but I didn't have any money with me anyway. When the man was busy bartering prices with a tenacious customer, I popped around the corner of the alley and snatched the closest piece of apparel to me, a one-piece neon orange bathing suit, and scurried off before anyone noticed. I reasoned what I was doing wasn't that bad because the man was illegally selling counterfeit items, and I was taking one more piece of stolen goods off of the streets. I walked off barefoot, trying to blend in with the shameless spring breakers who were wearing much less clothing than me. I slipped the bag of morphine into the bathing suit's breast padding so it wasn't so obvious, but did make my cup size increase. Not that I'd complain, my breathing steadied, however the pain in my chest only worsened. My stomach simultaneously grumbled and I thought maybe some food was what I needed, although I hardly had an appetite. Also, I didn't have any money, but I figured I could sweet-talk some lustful man to buy me a meal, using my long, tan legs as a weapon. My papa always told me that a woman's body was the easiest way to render men powerless. I walked a couple blocks trying to find a cantina to grab a bite to eat at. It was hard finding a bar that didn't have too many witnesses inside who might be suspicious of me, whilst also not being too secluded where I could find myself in another precarious situation. El Lobo's cantina seemed perfect, as it was the only bar that looked meticulously maintained. The white stone facade was bright and welcoming, and the smoke from the fajitas actually made my mouth water. I took a seat down at the bar and a female bartender asked me if I wanted anything to drink. "I'm just here for some finger food, believe it or not," I told the bartender whose name tag said Cinnamon. Her name told me she had another job after this one finished. She took my order, just a basic nacho supreme, and I waited while my food came out. "Darlin', I'd love to get a taste of what you're offering," a man, middle-aged and down the bar, said with a lascivious tone as he bit down on his cigar. Although he repulsed me, I knew he was my ticket to a free meal. "Maybe I'll reward you with a taste if you pay for my meal, huh?" I offered. "That's all it'd take, darlin'." "Use is too easy. I like when the girls are hard to get," he replied, his lips curving in a devilish smile as he took a puff of his tobacco. "Easy to get, hard to keep," I joked, sliding down a few bar stools closer. "Is that right, huh?" The man smirked. Now that I was closer, I noticed the weasel of a man's features, short, bald, and his skin torched from the sun. He looked like a man who came to bars with the sole purpose of finding some young girl to pick up. Cinnamon returned with my nachos and placed them down in front of me. The beef was sizzling, and the cheese looked thick and creamy like fondue. "Hey, Cinnamon," the man yelled firmly, and the bartender quickly straightened up and hurried over to the man. "Get this fine lady a mojito on the house." On the house? How did he have the authority to order drinks on the house? He looked like a vagabond, not a business owner. "Yes, sir," she submitted and made the drink so quickly. It felt like she used magic to conjure it up. She slid it in front of me as I took a bite of my nachos. The bald man next to me watched me as I took a bite. "Yummy, huh?" he asked, his eyebrow raised. I ignored his question and asked one of my own. "You come here often?" I interrogated, noticing how Cinnamon reacted so anxiously to the man. My stomach started feeling unsettled, and I wasn't sure if it was from the nachos or the man next to me. "You could say that." He let out a low chuckle as he gulped the rest of his whiskey. "Food isn't that good though to come that much," I said, blatantly honest after tasting the nachos. "People usually don't come here for the food." He winked and nodded to Cinnamon, the stripper behind the bar. "El Lobo, how we doing tonight?" A group of men walked in, slapping the man's shoulder next to me in a brotherly type of way. The man next to me gave them all a quick fist bump. "El Lobo? As in the guy the cantina was named after? You own this place?" I asked him after the group of men moved past him and headed towards the back of the restaurant. "Indeed I do, darlin'." He paused, took another puff of his cigar, and continued, "I own a lot more than just that." He released a low growl and laughed wickedly. "And now I own you. Hashtag chapter 5. Do me a favor, mi amigo." "Gentlemen," he clapped his hands together and summoned the group of men who just walked in, "why don't we show this young lady around the place?" It felt like less of a request and more of a command. Immediately, my stomach dropped as 4 men surrounded me. I had nowhere to escape to this time. I could shift, but if they weren't shifters themselves, that might cause them to resort to using guns, something I wasn't prepared to take on. And regardless, I was drastically outnumbered, and I had no head start to help me. It wouldn't have done any good. "Go easy on her," El Lobo, as they called him, instructed. His command didn't reassure me, as go easy usually implied that whatever they were going to do to me was the exact opposite of that. I kept calm and didn't make a run for it because I knew that would only lead to more aggression. Luckily, the men, all 4, who were quite scruffy and unkempt, didn't put their hands on me, except one who was a bit heavy-set with a beer gut. He started sniffing my long hair. "George, knock it off. What did I tell you about scaring the assets?" El Lobo scolded. George backed off and pouted his lips like a child. "Assets? What type of establishment are you running? A prostitution ring?" I accused, not thinking much of my statement at first until El Lobo responded. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." He jumped down off his bar stool to get his footing. I guess he was shorter than I expected, and walked towards me. He opened his arms wide and spun around. "Welcome to El Lobo's, darlin'," he introduced proudly. A cold shiver enshrouded my body, and my hands felt jittery. I could feel George's breath blowing onto my shoulder, and the moist sensation made my skin crawl. My skin felt so exposed, and I moved my hands in front of my crotch, not wanting any of these lustful men to see my most vulnerable area. However, that also left my backside exposed. I had to get out of this before I found myself in an even worse situation than I had back with Augustin and Efrain. Efrain, that reminded me, maybe these scumballs knew of the other scumball. "You might want to think twice about taking me anywhere," I declared defiantly. All of the men looked at each other and let out maniacal laughs. George chimed in with his lisp. "Or whatcha gonna do, little girl? Kick our C's?" Then El Lobo walked forward and slapped George across the face. "She looks like she can kick your A*S, and I know your twisted A*S would like it." The rest of the men laughed on George's behalf. El Lobo then shifted his glance towards me and clamped down on his cigar, freeing his hand to touch my chin, which he pulled down so I could meet his gaze. "Darlin', I don't think you know who you're entangled with, okay?" he said, puffing words out through his clenched teeth. I shook his hand off of my chin, his touch repulsing me, and with a firm voice I said, "I'd say the same thing about you." His eyes opened, seemingly intrigued, as he removed his cigar and shushed the butt of it in a marble ashtray on the bar counter behind him. "You familiar with an Efrain?" I asked, remembering I didn't know Efrain's last name, a lot of them, so what? He retorted. I needed to think of a way around not knowing. "You know, Efrain, Augustin's boy, from the pound?" As I revealed the extra information, El Lobo began taking his seat on the bar stool only to quickly stand back up. "You talking about El Cuchillo here?" I nodded. El Lobo's posture became shaky as if an apparition of Efrain had appeared right in front of him. "Did the two have a bad history?" he stammered. Why yeah, I know him. WH, what about it? I belong to him," I said firmly, before adding, "I'm his girl." I was surprised by El Lobo's change in behavior when he let out a small laugh. "He's got a lot of ladies, darlin'. None of you's is special to him." "Oh, really?" I scoffed. "Not even his fated mate." El Lobo started choking on his own breath, and after bracing the bar stool for support, he finally regained his composure. "You said you're his what?" El Lobo repeated. "You heard me loud and clear," I shot back. "Now, it'd be in your best interest to let me go before El Cuchillo himself comes and deals with you all." I heard El Lobo gulp, and I knew immediately he was terrified of Efrain just by the look in his eyes. "Well, you heard the lady, return her," he ordered his men. "I think I can find my way out," I insisted. "I'm an adult." El Lobo sighed. "Darlin', you think I was born yesterday? Let's really see if you are the woman you claim to be." The 4 men each latched onto me as El Lobo watched them take me away through the back of the cantina. They led me into a white van and tied me up with restraints as if they had done this on a regular basis. El Lobo walked through the door soon thereafter, swinging a pair of car keys around his finger before he entered the driver's side door. My mind was swirling, and I knew I'd be dead if I ever returned to Efrain. After all, that's what he told Fidel he'd do to me. I felt nauseous by El Lobo's erratic driving as well and wanted to throw up, but I hadn't enough food in my system for anything to come up. Cold sweats began trickling down my arms, and all the blood was rushing to my wrists and ankles where I had been tied. The only pain that seemed to decrease was my chest pain, which subsided the closer we got to the pound. My mind immediately jumped to the morphine. Celeste gave me a way to end everything, should I ever have been caught. Now would have been the time to use it if I wasn't tied up. Damn it, that's when it dawned on me. There was no way out of this one. My fate would be decided by Efrain, the one they called El Cuchillo, the knife. The van slow rolled to a checkpoint, which was just two men dressed in body armor, armed with pistols, and they asked El Lobo his purpose. "We're returning your Alpha's lost goods," he informed them. The two guards looked at each other, seemingly dumbfounded. El Lobo instructed, "Open the door for these kind men, George." George shifted in his seat and unlatched the sliding door. The two guards approached the open space and peeked their heads in, their eyes locked on me. "Never seen this girl before," one of them said. The other added, "Yeah, can't say I have either, but we got a lot of girls down there. I suppose it's possible." "Yo Dan," the shorter guard spoke. "You think she's the code 313? The taller guard raised his eyebrow and replied, "It's possible. Let's send them in." He slammed the door shut and pounded on the side of the metal twice as he ordered, "You're clear to go." "Thank you, gentlemen," El Lobo said, not sounding appreciative at all, and continued driving. None of the streets looked familiar, but that was because I had escaped through the alleyways and didn't take any main thoroughfares. I tried to keep attention to my surroundings in case I had the opportunity to escape again, but realized that was foolish thinking. Of course, there would be no second chance. The van crawled its way up a slight incline, and at the end of it was the facade of the bodega I had first entered with Celeste. Goddess, I hoped she was still alive. We took a turn around the bodega and stopped in front of a parking ramp where we waited until the doors opened up. They must have been awaiting confirmation from the two guards we saw earlier whether or not to let us in. El Lobo knew exactly where to drive, which made it apparent that Efrain and him indeed had a working relationship, even though it seemed Efrain had much more power over him. After winding around 5 levels of the parking ramp, we arrived on the ground floor where Efrain was standing with at least 10 different men at his sides and a couple of pit bulls on chains for good measure. Efrain clearly dressed differently when he had business to attend to. He was dressed in a crisp charcoal-colored suit that showcased his muscular figure, and he towered over the rest of the men. His black shoes reflected the fluorescent lights in the garage. His dark eyes were staring directly at the van, waiting for me to walk out. George and the 3 others pushed me out of the van after they had undone the restraints. I fell to my knees in front of Efrain. I didn't dare look up at him. My knees drew blood as they scraped along the concrete. My bathing suit did nothing to protect me. "Jesus Christ, George," El Lobo screamed as he exited the driver's seat. "You trying to get us killed?" "That's his girl." Efrain released a low growl, seemingly displeased. I wondered if it was because he felt protective of me or because El Lobo associated me with him. I watched El Lobo approach Efrain, as I kept my gaze fixated on him instead of the man who technically held claim to me. I heard Efrain's baritone voice initiate the conversation. "We meet again, Oscar." It seemed Efrain had no use for nicknames. "Mr. Rodriguez, always a pleasure," El Lobo responded, reaching out his hand only for it to be left empty. I sensed sarcasm in his voice, that dealing with Efrain and his pack was anything but a pleasant time. "She says she belongs to you," he continued. "Technically, you'd be right," Efrain chuckled, and it was unsettling how gravelly it was. The conversation momentarily paused while Efrain was enjoying his amusement. "Technically, huh?" "She said you two are fated mates," El Lobo clarified. The statement only caused Efrain to laugh louder. "Her. This WH*3, my fated mate. Huh, that's comedic, you know me, Oscar. I'm not ready to settle down this young. There's still a lot of fun to be had out there," Efrain said. I saw El Lobo's eyes dart directly to mine as if he wanted to call me a liar. El Lobo muttered, "That lying be *TCH, Efrain sighed. "Oh, Oscar, this is why you're always stuck at the bottom. You can't trust anyone, I learned that, and now I'm untouchable, F*King untouchable." I heard Efrain's dress shoes take a few steps forward and his body came into view. He walked right next to me and placed his long fingers on El Lobo's shoulder like a father would to a son to teach him a lesson. I know we have had a troubled history, to put it lightly, Efrain began, and I heard El Lobo gulp. I finally looked up and could see Efrain's straight neck, which was covered with tattoos that screamed, "Don't mess with this man." "But I appreciate what you did today," Efrain added, his tone lightening up now. "So, I'd like to reward you for it." Dramatically, Efrain lunged down, resting the back of his thighs on his calves, like he was doing a squat. His arms were on his knees. He forced his gaze right into my eyes, the corner of his lips smirked, and it was clear he wanted me to see his face, to show his level of power. At the moment, I was disgusted by everyone and didn't know who to hate most, or who to fear most. My mind raced back to my papa, and even though he was nowhere near the evil these guys were, he was the one who had sold me, dumped me into these gangsters' laps. Right now, my heart loathed my papa the most. Efrain stuck out his pointer finger and ran it down my thigh, tracing my curves like a stencil. His touch was rough, his fingers cold. My leg, as AF it was a natural reflex, shuddered when he made contact with me. He lifted his finger back up and brought it to his tongue. My father was right, the B** starred, she is sweet. He shook his head and paused. Nobody said a word. The air in the underground loft was suffocating and sterile. "Oh, what's this?" Efrain took his hands and approached my breasts. He ripped the metal chain out. I noticed they were bigger than before. He immediately searched the pouch and held up the vial of morphine. My heart was thumping, and I felt the whole room could hear it too. He swirled it around, and then, with all his might, threw it against the concrete wall. The glass shattered, my last hope to die peacefully going with it. Efrain sked a few times and laughed with a gravelly tone. It sounded like he was gargling motor oil. Too easy. Then Efrain turned to El Lobo and exclaimed, "Take her off of my hands for me." WH what? El Lobo's voice nearly cracked. I was equally shocked by Efrain's request. "For how much, Mr. Rodriguez?" Lobo's voice was laced with shock. Efrain's voice became cool, and he glared at me, his eyes empty while he spoke. "No cost, mi amigo, you're doing me the favor." Hashtag chapter 6. "You're losing us customers. Take her back, gentlemen," Oscar instructed his men. I was going back to the cantina. I didn't know if this was any better, or even worse. Surely, not having to see Efrain, El Cuchillo as his groupies called him, was a positive. However, the moment I looked up at George and the others, my stomach felt unsettled. "You heard the boss," George slithered, spit coming out from his mouth. The three other men gripped my arms tightly and started pulling me away. My thighs dragged against the concrete as they forcibly guided me towards the van. My eyes remained on the puddle of morphine in the distance. This time I didn't even bother looking out of the window on the ride back. It felt like I'd never see the real world again. I'd never be the first one in my family to graduate college. I'd never get the chance to see my best friend Miriam again. I'd never even get the chance to confront my papa to get answers. Hopelessness was seeping into me, not because I'd been captive for long, but because I knew the feeling of freedom before this and had it snatched away from me. Arguably, it was worse than never having freedom at all. That's why Celeste seemed content to live out her life down there. We arrived back at El Lobo's, and the van door slid open violently, and I was tossed out onto the coarse asphalt. "Don't think about running, little girl, or else your punishment will be rougher." George rolled his R sensually. I wanted to spit in his face, but Oscar stared straight at him and mocked. "George, your F***King Shrimp D***CK couldn't find its way into a wormhole." Served him right. Then Oscar rounded up his men and instructed, "Take her down to the stables." My skin crawled. Everything that had a name attached to it turned out to be despicable. I had the sense this wouldn't be any different. I could tell just by El Lobo himself that he wasn't buttoned up and crisp like Efrain. Although it was impersonal, the concubine at the pound was orderly, systematic, and relatively clean. The cantina appeared that way, reputable, clean, austere, from the outside, but it was just a facade, surely, for much darker, dirtier things residing within. Before I could think anymore, my legs were being dragged again, and I wrapped my arms under my calves to try and brace the cuts coming from the chiseled pavement. I breathed a brief sigh of relief as we crossed the threshold between the alleyway and the cantina, where the asphalt was replaced by smooth stone tile which didn't do much to hurt me. I felt woozy seeing my own trail of blood dragging along the white mosaic stones. However, for men and you can't even pick her up off the ground, Oscar chided. Which one of you is gonna clean this damn mess up? La Pasma will be all up my A*s if they see this. I'm sure George wouldn't mind a police officer's batting up his A*s, one of the men joked, getting approval from all his other buddies, except George. Only if she's got some big titties on her, George chucked out, not sure that'd still be a she, George. The same man rolled his eyes, George revealed, doesn't bother me as long as I can smother my face into some flesh. These weren't men, these were F***king sick animals, and they still had their grimy paws all over me. I wished they would just lock me up wherever they were taking me so I could be alone. Oscar chimed in, well in that case, George, you can stick your tongue into this flesh on the ground until my floors are crystal clean. His tone raised, and he was clearly annoyed. The business he ran was important to him, and I wondered if it meant more to him than just making money. Yes, boss, George accepted, but he didn't seem to mind the punishment. Finally, George released me from his grasp, and as he was about to get down on all fours and use his tongue, Oscar tossed him a mop and a bucket. Now, he looked disappointed. The three other men took over compensating for the loss of George and carried me to the back of the cantina where we paused. The tallest man turned a key that looked like a wolf's tooth that was carefully placed at the middle pocket of a pool table. After a few seconds, a hatch opened up under the pool table with a wooden staircase leading down, with me tight in their grasps. The men continued marching downward, and after we descended the dozen stairs, the door locked tight behind us. Immediately, a stench filled my nostrils. It wasn't just the smell of bodily fluids, but also liquor, nicotine, and latex. My stomach churned, and I wasn't sure if it was by the disgusting blend of scents or just the way my body was being warped in the air. Can you let me down now? I spat. I have legs, you know, yes, precious, we can see those nice and close. I'd love to see where they lead to, one of the men said. They lead to my pelvis, dumbass, let her down, the tallest man ordered. My arms are hurting, plus, there's nowhere for her to go. These men were nothing compared to how polished and trained Efrain's men were. I felt I had a chance where I could actually take them on in a one-on-one situation, but I was still outnumbered and didn't even have a sense of my surroundings yet. After what felt like ages of being suspended in midair, my feet finally touched the ground. To my surprise, it was finely carpeted and didn't bother my feet. Ahead of me was just a long corridor, all painted black with a velvet carpet. A few dim wall sconces lined the otherwise plain hall and led to a singular rose-colored door. A dim red light hung on a single cable of metal over the doorway. As we approached, I made out the words on a golden nameplate next to the entryway. The stables, a small note underneath engraved in the metallic plate read, "Don't disturb the animals." Suddenly, I wasn't so sure where they were taking me. I was expecting a brothel, a prison, not some petting zoo. The tall man knocked a certain rhythmic pattern against the door, and the entryway slowly opened. The man stepped aside and ushered me forward. All I could see was a blinding light shining through, and I raised my hand to try and block it. "Welcome to your new life," a deep voice greeted, the chance to start over. I treaded forward, dragging my feet with uncertainty. But I was perfectly happy with my life before, with my papa, with my friends, with my dreams, my memories. All of it was how I wanted it. I didn't want to become someone new, as he was implying. Finally, the light subsided, and the sight in front of me made my legs loosen and collapse from under me. This had to be a hallucination. This wasn't possible. The black door, my last portal to my past life, slammed behind me, and I felt a rough pair of hands, presumably owned by the man with the deep voice, pulling me up by my neck. "Let's not waste time," he growled, but I couldn't move. I was dead weight. Surely, what I was looking at was past horrific. It was unthinkable madness. Unfathomable cruelty, glass boxes, dozens of them, filled with naked women, one box per lady. Each cubicle was enough for one to stand perfectly erect. "It's feeding time," I heard his voice faintly. My whole existence was in disarray. FF for who? I mumbled out the question. "The women, of course, you dumb *CK, he chided. I still never caught sight of the man leading me forwards. My focus was on the villainy staring back at me. Who are those men? I wanted some sort of answer to help me piece together the abstract scene I was faced with. Dozens of men standing in front of the glass confines rubbing themselves with their pants down. They're testing the merchandise. They need to see if they'll be satisfied with their purchase. I wanted to heave, but I had no food in me. My throat was burning, like volcanic rocks had peppered my esophagus. I couldn't even swallow. I felt like I was about to suffocate. Any air that was left in the room was being poisoned, so that's what feeding time was. Each pane of plexiglass had just enough room for AC*CK to fit into, and basically, it seemed the girls had no choice but to be showered with the seed from these scumbags. Why? I started, but the man kept pushing me forward. Shut the F*** up already. I answered enough questions. He spat. Immediately my eyes looked around, which box was going to be mine. To my relief, all were filled, which meant, for the time being, I wouldn't be participating in that sick ritual. As I walked by, all the compromised men who were rubbing themselves shifted their gaze over to me. One short bald man who surely couldn't see his P***NIS under his beer gut as he rubbed it, shouted out, "Felix, you've been holding out on us?" He released a dirty cackle. Felix called back, "New arrival, Juan Carlos, she'll be out there soon enough." Both of the men were familiar with each other, which made this even sicker. I just wondered, how soon was soon enough? Felix finally stepped forward and took the lead in front of me, trying to block me from the horny men. "You're going to make us lose sales today. Was that supposed to make me feel good? I was so beautiful, a bunch of debased sickos wanted me more than the other women?" I tried to keep my focus on where we were going, not wanting to make eye contact with all the men who were staring at me lasciviously. We finally crossed the length of the room, which was expansive like an airplane hangar, before we reached a set of stairs that led deeper. As we walked down the concrete slabs, motion-sensing lights flicked on as if they were leading us to a specific destination. Felix's grip on me loosened, probably because he knew I had nowhere I could go. His fingers were so long around my small wrist I think they nearly wrapped around twice. I imagined how they would look if he shifted, assuming he was a shifter. Usually I could tell by a scent, but the intoxicating odor of bodily fluid stripped me of my wolf senses. We finally reached the end of the long concrete tunnel, which looked like a bomb shelter. Clearly, they wanted their assets well protected. A round metal vault door awaited us, and Felix twisted the wheel with ease, although it looked impossible for any normal person to open. "I'll get you when you're needed," he instructed coolly and tossed me in. The lights were dim, so it was hard to see exactly what resided in here, but we were in some sort of a cave with an opening to the ocean. I heard the sloshing off water hitting the walls, and saw a faint lantern on the end of a stick that revealed an inlet. Small wooden boats full of young women sat huddled on the tiny vessels where they entered the cave. Women were being pulled off of the boats, and I wondered where they came from and where they were being led to. They all looked meager, distressed, and clearly taken against their will like me. Then, before I could even stand on my own feet, a man grabbed me violently by my wrist and forcefully led me to the left of the pier, further into the cave. There stood a row of seemingly never-ending prison cells, each with only 2 girls per confinement. He pushed me inside of the cell, where a timid young woman was sitting patiently. She had striking red hair and deep indigo blue eyes. The contrast of the 2 colors looked like an open flame, a strong blue encircled in a fiery red. After the bars slammed shut, her eyes peered up at me. She offered a smile, as if she was awaiting company. Then, she rose to her feet, but it seemed difficult, and I could even see a bit of her bones. She must have been here for a long time. Maybe because of her poor condition, no one wanted to buy her. Her scrawny hand extended to greet mine, and I returned the gesture. I could tell by the warmth pulsating from her palms that she was going to be a source of comfort for me as long as I remained here. "Thank you," I whispered, so as not to draw attention. I trailed off not knowing her name, but, as if she read my mind, she filled in, "Ginger." "Catalina," I answered back, finding a bit of relief that I wouldn't be alone here. ## Chapter 7, The Perfect Father. I had so many questions I wanted to ask Ginger, but I thought it would be insensitive to start our conversation with that. Instead, I decided I would let her take the lead and see what she had on her mind. While she had no problem smiling at me, she didn't seem interested in opening up, and understandably so. Compared to all the girls I had seen here so far, she seemed the most malnourished and mistreated. In fact, I couldn't see how any man would buy her in this condition. It made me wonder if she'd end up dying here like an abandoned animal. All she said was, "You're beautiful, Catalina." I put my lips together and nodded. I wanted to say, "You are too," but then I felt it would seem disingenuous by giving the same compliment back. Ginger was beautiful, but I knew she wouldn't see herself that way given her current appearance: bruised, scraggly hair, dirty, Given that I was still a fully functioning human being just a few days ago, able to eat whatever I wanted and exercise at the gym to keep my figure looking this good, I was sure I'd end up like her too if I was stuck in here much longer. Thank you, Ginger. Your eyes are BEA. She raised her hand. Please, don't lie to me. I wasn't lying, but I could see why she would assume I was. Ginger continued, I'm not beautiful. Nothing about me is, okay? If I was, I would have been sold already. Her smile faded by now, and she even seemed a bit upset at me. I'm sorry if I brought up a sore subject, but I really meant what I said. I tried to reassure her. I clarified, that's one thing you'll either love or hate about me, my honesty. If only more people in this world were honest, she muttered, fiddling with some pebbles that were on the ground. She wouldn't look at me. Yeah, if only, right? I laughed, trying to brighten the mood. She didn't break her trance on the pebbles. How does a girl like you end up in a place like this? Ginger cried, as she started throwing the pebbles one by one at the iron bars of the cell. They made minor clanking noises, and a girl across the way yelled at Ginger to shut up. It seemed like Ginger wasn't well favored here. Where do I begin? I sighed breathily. How about the part where I was sold by my father? All I heard was her pooling her saliva together before she spat against the concrete. I wasn't sure if she was disgusted or had dirt in her mouth. Nothing surprises me anymore, she scoffed. He told me we were going out to lunch to celebrate the end of my semester at the university, I explained. The memory made my face flush with anger. He wasn't lying about eating though. I was literally fed to the wolves. I thought aloud. Dad of the year, huh? She exhaled after throwing the last pebble. Yeah, I know, I chuckled, but I realized how dark the humor had become. Ginger's mind state seemed equally fragile, and although I wanted to know more about her, and wondered if she too had been betrayed by her family, I knew I shouldn't ask. Instead, I focused on what I could expect down here. Ginger stood up, wrapping her arms around the iron bars of the cell as if she was looking for someone. So, we just sit here all day until Felix calls us or what? I asked. Felix, you said? He doesn't make any calls. He just enforces them, actually. He used to be one of us. Kind of, she trailed off. What do you mean? I followed up, curiously. He's a slave too, so to speak. Ginger paused before continuing. He was looking for his sister who was trafficked by El Lobo. He snuck on a boat to try and find her. He still hasn't located her. That made me wonder how many lives were ripped apart due to this trafficking ring. It broke my heart as it seemed many of these girls weren't sold like me, but rather kidnapped. When he got here, he pleaded with El Lobo not to kill him. El Lobo agreed and saw Felix as cheap labor. Felix was so diligent, and ran such a tight operation here, that clients loved him, so Oscar had no choice to pay him properly, remove his shackles, because he had gained so many connections with the wealthy elite buying these women. Felix started to make a name for himself, and these hypocritical men wouldn't have stood for their favorite ringleader to be a slave himself, Ginger scoffed. But, they have no problem letting us be, right? I replied, it's a man's world, and we're just living in it, Ginger said as she spat once again. Not as long as I'm still in it, I chuckled. Just wait until they let me out of here, I threatened. Ginger turned around and faced me. I was still sitting on the ground when she said, that's how all us girls thought at the beginning, until we realized the harsh reality. Think again at your statement, you said, until they let me out. Who was they? She asked. Well, Felix, I guessed. Outside of Felix, think broader, she countered. I massaged my temples, trying to get my brain to work properly. El Lobo? The people buying us? The men, Ginger quickly interjected. Ding 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 ding, we have a winner. She mimicked the sound of a bell as she knocked on the iron bars beside her. All men are terrible, she muttered with a disgruntled tone. I think so too, I confessed as I stood up to get closer to her. At first, I looked at my papa as my hero. I saw him as an anomaly. I knew he was involved in the mafia, but I also knew he was doing it to support me. To give me a better life than he had. I trusted him, and then he betrayed me. That's the last time I'll ever trust a man. Same here, sister, Ginger agreed, and the word sister lightened my dark heart. I knew she was just speaking casually, but after growing up an only child, and losing my mother early, I missed not having a female figure who I could talk to. No luck with men, either, huh? I sighed, but surprisingly it caused Ginger's expression to harden. She shook her head repeatedly, and tears were welling in her eyes. I placed my hand on her shoulder to reassure her, but I knew it was too late. I had already opened the wound. Regret instantly flooded my veins. Ginger, I didn't mean, she sighed between sniffling. It's fine, it's fine. It's time I got this off my chest, she said as she wiped a tear from her cheek. I probably won't be seeing you around much longer, so it wouldn't hurt to finally let someone know. You're the first person I've felt I can trust since coming down here, and I don't know why. I wanted to take her hand, give her the last bit of strength I had left, but I felt it could make her even more uncomfortable. She took a seat in the dark, far corner of the cell, and I remained where I was to give her space. My father, was all Ginger said. I could still see her amber hair and blue eyes peering through the shadows where she was sitting. The cell had no windows either, which meant the only light was a dim bulb hanging in the hallway. The darkness could consume anyone here. After she cleared her throat, she continued on. He was the definition of everything right in a man. Intelligent, witty, strong, righteous. I imagined what her father would have looked like. He seemed dreamy, fantastical, and mythical even, kind of the opposite of my papa who had a stereotypical dad bod and a balding head. Then, Ginger carried on. He was always faithful to me. Despite how busy he was, he always made time for me. He attended every tennis match I played in. He came to every orchestra concert I participated in, and he never missed a parent-teacher conference, even though he was the CEO of many Fortune 500 companies. Ginger's tone sounded wistful, and a lump formed in my throat thinking of how her father could have betrayed her. He seems like the perfect man, I chimed in, but I actually meant to keep that thought reserved in my head. Ginger heard it and replied, he was. She stopped talking and I heard the sobs returning. Surely, there was a but then, coming to her story. Yet, the but then never came. I couldn't help myself. How did someone like Ginger end up here, if her father was so perfect? Why are you here, and not with him? I pried, selfishly. I'm sorry for asking, I added, knowing I overstepped my boundaries. Because he died, she cried from the shadows. My body shivered as she began shrieking in agony. Again, some girls yelled, "Shut up *TCH" from across the way. I scurried up to Ginger and knelt down to console her. I massaged her back and after a few minutes she regained composure. I didn't want to say anything else that could reinvigorate her painful memories, as much as I was still left wondering about how her father died, or how she ended up here. I'd have to table that conversation until she was ready. The one thing she said, though, that made me confused was, all men are terrible, because certainly her father didn't fit that description. How could he have left me alone here? I thought he loved me, I heard Ginger mutter between labored sobs. Since she brought it up, I offered my opinion. Knowing how highly you speak of your father, I'm sure he didn't willingly die and leave you behind, I noted. I wondered how he had died. He never told me he was dying. He left me a note at the house when I returned on spring break during my first year of college. He said he was terminally ill and wouldn't be alive when I came back. He didn't want to disrupt my studies. He left me everything, the house, his bank accounts, but all of his businesses he had stepped down from prior to his death in anticipation, Ginger recalled. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, it made sense, with how much her father loved her. Maybe he just couldn't bear to tell her he was dying. Maybe he didn't want to put his daughter through the pain of having to say goodbye, but inadvertently it had hurt her more. I'm so sorry for your loss, Ginger, I said. I grabbed her hand tightly, wanting to give her the little warmth I had left to offer. Her breathing steadied a bit, and all that she was left with were some sniffles. I thought he would have more of a backbone than to leave me without saying goodbye. Her tone firmed up. Is it possible he had a reason? I offered, although she didn't seem in the mood to think objectively. He probably did, she said as she removed her hand from mine and wiped her nose on her brown long-sleeved shirt. It wasn't supposed to be brown, it just hadn't been washed in a while. Then she added, but I wouldn't forgive him even if I knew the reason. I knew Ginger's life wasn't mine, and I should be focused merely on my own survival, but the curiosity in me wanted to find out the reason why her father didn't say goodbye to Ginger. It seemed like the emotional impact of how he died hadn't left her, and it seemed like she'd been here for a long time. Changing the conversation, I asked, how often do clients come in to buy girls? I wanted to know so I could be prepared for what I would be expected to strip down. The first man who blew his load on me, I was going to strangle alive as soon as I was out of that glass enclosure. Every day, she answered, and my stomach churned, realizing my time could be coming soon when I was auctioned off. Do they call out the same girls often? I followed up, wondering if we would be expected to present ourselves daily. Depends, they take the healthiest girls first. Now, you have some fresh wounds on your legs, so I'd expect they'd wait until those healed, or else you'd be sold at a massive discount. But don't think you can keep yourself in that condition for too long. You will be offloaded to one of our cheapest buyers named Javier. He purchases any of the remaining women who are at a discounted price, and F***CKs them until they bleed to death. It's better if you go to one of the top clients. Ginger clearly was well versed on the whole situation here. She knew all the tricks and all the clients. It made me wonder, why was she still here after so long? You're probably wondering why Javier didn't buy me? Purely because he couldn't see *M when he saw me. I was meager and bony when I got here. None of the other women are. A few scratches won't scare him off, but no man would ever pay money for an ugly girl like me, Ginger stated plainly. It pained me personally how Ginger's self-confidence had taken such a hit here, but I fully understood why. Not that anyone wanted to be chosen by a bunch of horny rich men, but also, not being picked was a bigger blow to one's self-esteem and meant one could end up with a worse client. They keep me here to do the dirty work, clean up the cells, wash the girls, and even act as a translator between the women and the clients, she clarified. This whole trafficking ring was a burgeoning ecosystem in the darkest parts of Miami. Although, I wasn't shocked to have known it existed, I was surprised at how meticulous of an operation it was. This was a full-blown industry that the government was keeping under wraps. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a hand in it. My thoughts were disrupted as I heard the vault unlock and Felix's voice hearken through the hallway giving commands. I heard his footsteps near our cell, and he knocked on the bars to get our attention, but it was actually Ginger who he wanted. Ginger, get the girl here ready for our showing tomorrow, he ordered. Ginger acknowledged but countered, but sir, she still isn't in great condition. Look at her legs, they will only devalue her price, and I'm sure she would set the record for highest sale price if she was in perfect condition. We should wait a few days. Felix paused and surveyed my body. He grunted and followed up, just wash her up and get her a new pair of clothes, okay? I'll make the decision tomorrow. Yes sir, Ginger exclaimed as Felix unlocked our cell. Felix took off down the hall and entered a small office where it seemed he kept his administrative documents on all the girls. Pissed Ginger, I whispered under my breath. Couldn't we make a run for it? Ginger released a low chuckle. Yeah, if you think you can survive swimming across the Atlantic Ocean, then be my guest. The closest island is a good 50 miles away. I gulped. There was no way out of here unless it was by the hands of the highest bidder.